and welcome. On day 2 of his visit to Japan, Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India met with his Japanese counterpart Shinzo Abe. Afterwards, Abe and Modi together visited the manufacturing hub of Fanuc Corporation. Fanuc Corporation is one of the largest makers of industrial robots. Modi and Abe toured the robotics and automation facilities of the corporation. Now, Modi gifted Abe a stone bowl and carpet specifically crafted for the Japanese premier. These stone bowls were made from rose quartz and yellow quartz stone, sourced from the western Indian state of Rajasthan. The carpets were hand-woven by master weavers from the northern Indian state of Uttar Pradesh. Modi also presented Abe a Jodhpuri wooden vest with Rajasthani traditional work. Now, it's the 5th summit meeting between Modi and Abe and the 12th overall. Modi has visited Japan 3 times as the Prime Minister. For his part, Abe has made reciprocal visits to India for the annual summit, which is alternatively held in India and Japan. Tomorrow, under the framework of the special strategic and global partnership between India and Japan, Modi and Abe will have wide-ranging discussions on bilateral, regional and global issues. Now, India has annual summit-level engagements only with 2 countries, Russia and Japan. This morning, Abe extended a personal welcome to Modi by hosting him at his lake house in the Yamanashi prefecture. Besides defense and security, connectivity will be a top focus. Japan is keen to expand connectivity projects linking India's northeast to the neighboring countries such as Bangladesh and Myanmar. And joining me in the studio is my guest Dhruv Jaishankar, a fellow with Brookings India. Now, Brookings is a not-for-profit organization dealing in public policy headquartered in Washington, D.C., and its recent research focused on India-Japan security relations. Dhruv, thank you for joining us on Wion this evening. Now, preview for us the India-Japan summit. What's in it for India and Japan?
So this is fast becoming, it has become in some ways a very important partnership in the region. For both countries. For India, as you mentioned in your previously, the only other countries with which India has this kind of arrangement is with Russia. Last year, in January of 2017, when Prime Minister Modi was speaking about his view on foreign policy at a speech here in Delhi, he highlighted relations with the US, Russia and Japan as being amongst the most important global partnerships for India, and therefore I think we have seen that emerge with these series of annual summits. Japan is one of the largest investors in India, a large source of FDI. India is a large destination of Japanese official development assistance as well, ODA. And many signature initiatives in India dating back to Maruti Suzuki in the 1980s, to the Delhi Metro in the 1990s, to the first high-speed rail in India, which is expected to come into to be realized in the next few years, have all come with sizable Japanese financing behind it. So as an economic partner, it remains very important. I think we'll see some announcements to that effect tomorrow. But increasingly also it's becoming an important defense relationship. And for Japan in particular, India is emerging after the United States and perhaps Australia as perhaps its most important defense partnership in the region.
And talking about tomorrow's delegation-level talks, now, what might be the takeaways and outcomes from those talks in terms of the logistics pact, the pact on infrastructure cooperation in third countries or third areas, and also the maritime domain awareness?
So I think we'll see a few announcements tomorrow that will build upon prior initiatives.
Okay.
One area will be in terms of maritime domain awareness, which is an area of increasing cooperation involving the 2 countries, as well as others as well.
Right.
The growing security competition in the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific, including in the South China Sea, is a shared concern of both Japan and India. And therefore, I think we will see this implementation agreement building upon prior partnership. But in a few other areas, we will see some breakthroughs, although these are very early breakthroughs on the defense side. One will be, they will likely announce the first ground exercises between Indian and Japanese forces to be held tentatively in November. perhaps the first air-to-air contacts as well, at least in terms of exercises, with Japan being an observer at a US-India bilateral air exercise in December. We will see perhaps some initial steps towards joint research and development in the military sphere, including in terms of unmanned and robotics, unmanned vehicles and robotics. And then I'd say a fourth area that we may see some progress is the starting of negotiations towards what's called an acquisition and cross-servicing agreement, AXA, which is a logistics agreement that would enable the two countries to basically more seamlessly share logistics with each other.
Now, Dhruv, we've spoken about the convergences. Now, let's talk a bit about the divergences, the dissonance in the relationship. To begin with, the Quad. Now, you refer to it as the matrix. Don't particularly like the term Quad or quadrilateral. We'll come to that in a bit. But the other issue is the divergence on the issue of the way forward in the Indo-Pacific, insofar as strategy goes. The third issue is the Belt and Road Initiative. China is proverbial elephant in the room, so to speak. And finally, the RCEP, the Economic Partnership Agreement, which is still pending or under negotiations. Now, on all these four issues, the Quad, the Indo-Pacific strategy, BRI and RCEP, how do you see India-Japan ties maturing going forward?
So I would say all four of those areas are actually areas of tentative cooperation, and I think we are at a stage now where India and Japan have laid out their broad visions, and there's a great deal of commonality between those visions. And we're running now into challenges as to how to implement those, and sometimes India and Japan have different priorities and different ways of going about it. So just to walk through those issues. On the Quad, I think it is still a foreign ministry-led dialogue. It is now meeting, it may meet for the third time in about a year and a half this year. So it has now been resurrected. It is not a political level dialogue quite yet, but it is a foreign ministry coordination mechanism between the United States, Japan, India and Australia. And the very fact that it's been resurrected, I think, is a positive direction for that relationship. There are also a number of trilateral engagements going on underneath that, and I think it's important to highlight those, including a Japan, India, Australia dialogue, and then a US-Japan-India dialogue as well, which met last year as at the foreign ministers level. When it comes to the Indo-Pacific strategies, I think Japan very much welcomed Prime Minister Modi's articulation of that India's approach to the Indo-Pacific, which he articulated in Singapore earlier this year in June. I think it again it showed a lot of commonality in terms of visions. Again, now the question is how to put this in practice, which gets to the Belt and Road Initiative. Again, India and Japan have very similar concerns about the sustainability and viability of some of these projects, but we have slightly different ways of approaching it. Japan believes, and this was announced when Prime Minister Abe just a few days ago was in Beijing, that they are open to joint projects with China.
Right.
And they believe that this kind of cooperation between Japan and China will actually lead to diminishing security concerns about the Belt and Road Initiative. India has taken a slightly different tack, which is boycotting the Belt and Road Initiative, at least rhetorically and politically, although it has been open to joint projects with China. So I think we've had slightly different approaches to the Belt and Road Initiative, even though the concerns are the same and the objectives are largely similar. And finally, on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, Japan has actually been at the forefront of leading the new regional trade order. It has entered into a trade agreement with the European Union. It has resurrected the Trans-Pacific Partnership minus the United States. And so RCEP remains one area which it's a mechanism which India is also involved in, where Japan is hopeful that there can be at least some movement later this year. We may see some at the East Asia Summit, and perhaps even with more being finalized next year.
And before I come to my next question, very quickly, Dhruv, what are your principal reservations against using this phrase or word Quad?
Well, the Quad, much more has been written about the Quad than has actually been implemented, and so it has become in some ways a focus of attention and controversy for people who are skeptical of the notion of greater cooperation amongst these four countries. Therefore, I mean, obviously the quadrilateral dialogue exists, but it has become conflated with the Indo-Pacific. It has become conflated with the Malabar exercise, even though there was only one occasion in 2007 when the Quad countries actually exercised together, their navies exercise together. So I'm not skeptical of the Quad per se. I think I've been a proponent of it, but I do think inordinate focus has in some ways taken away the focus from some very discrete cooperation that is taking place amongst these four countries.
And talking about the regional the cooperation between India and Japan. How do you look at the Asia-Africa growth corridor, the moves by both India and Japan to counter, so to speak, China's BRI in the region and beyond?
So the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor again reflects this commonality of visions for the Indo-Pacific. It extends from Africa to Asia, the Indian and Pacific Oceans, two oceans and two continents, as the Japanese like to point out. But I think we are now entering into the mechanics of how to cooperate in third countries. Again, Japan already invests heavily in India. Japan already has very large projects from East Africa, places like Mombasa and Kenya, to Myanmar and Bangladesh. And India has been very encouraging and supportive of this. India has its own efforts in places like Chabahar in Iran. And the challenge now is how to coordinate, because I think Indian and Japanese systems are not used to working together, not used to working with second countries. So that is, I think, now a challenge, and it may still take a while to overcome some of these hiccups.
And finally, Dhruv, before I let go of you now, Shinzo Abe is set to become Japan's longest-serving Prime Minister. He's already become re-elected as the head of the LDP. Abe in particular wants to revisit the constitution to reform or revise the so-called pacifist constitution. Now, does that offer opportunities for India in terms of strengthening and broadening the defense and security cooperation going forward?
No, absolutely. And India has actually been supportive of some of the constitutional reinterpretation that has taken place over the last few years. It will still be a very hard sell for Abe to do, despite consolidating his power within his party and as Prime Minister. It will require significant support in both houses of the legislature, the Diet. It will also require incredible popular support. So it may be quite difficult to achieve in practice. However, it also does it would reduce the barriers in some ways to cooperation in certain areas, including in the use of potentially of Japanese official ODA, Japanese official development assistance to projects that might have a security purpose as well. And for that reason, I think India would obviously welcome it. But I think that being said, a lot of cooperation, India and Japan have shown that a lot of cooperation is already possible even within the framework of a pacifist constitution.
All right, on that note, Dhruv Jaishankar, thank you so much for joining me on the discussion on Wion World is One. Appreciate it. Thank you.